Very excited about our next guest coming from Windhoek in Namibia. We have Sergio De Souza with us. Sergio De Souza is the head of digital transformation and strategist for FNB Namibia. He is currently heading data and digital transformation at FNB in Namibia. He has 8 years of experience in driving transformation with national and regional payment systems during his time at the Central Bank of Namibia. He then started the digital transformation department in FNB Namibia, one of the largest financial services providers in the country. He has built up the team to provide critical capabilities for the organization with robotics process automation, process engineering, innovation, and data. He's equally passionate about people, business, and technology. Sergio, what a privilege for all of us to have a leader from the financial services of the country of Namibia broadcasting his expertise to our global audience today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jose, for the great introduction, and good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you're dialing in from around the world. Yes, my name is Sergio De Souza, and I'm very excited and privileged to be with you today to share a topic that I've learned a lot about with practical experience in my time. And before we kick off, I would love to share a little bit of art with you. I'm just going to be playing a video. I'm busy getting it up, and once the video is done, I will carry on with my presentation. So just allow it a moment to load. Okay, thank you for taking the time to see that video. And I think what I liked about it and why I wanted to share it is very much in relation to the discussion that I'd like to have with you during this session and this time, is that if we look at the world we live in today, and there's so much information, there's so much technology, many of us are digital leaders around the table, and very much our role is to make sense of all the information, all the opportunities out there, and guide our businesses and help them to make sense of it. And for me, what I liked about that video is that at the beginning you see, and it, by the way, it's physical art. It's a bunch of lights that were put together in a warehouse. And simply all they did is they take the camera and move it into different perspectives. So at the beginning, it looks like chaos. You don't know what is being presented in front of you. But as soon as the camera starts changing its perspective and its angle, you start seeing a message. You start seeing the word light. It carries on moving, and then it looks like chaos again, and then you see the word dark. And I believe a lot of the journey and the concept of digital transformation and people involved in some form of driving digital transformation in their organizations is to try and make sense of the chaos, to simplify the complicated. And that's why we're here. And this is what I would love to talk to you about this afternoon. Just to kick off with the discussion that we have, I was very interested to see how the concept, the topic of digital transformation has grown in terms of interest. We know that it's been hyped up significantly over the last decade, but to what extent, and what does this actually mean? And I actually appreciated in the previous presentation is that Kevin didn't make reference to digital transformation. I actually like that he made reference to business transformation. And as a proxy for understanding the trend and the interest that the world has had in this topic of digital transformation, I looked at Google Trends. So if anybody knows what Google Trends, what it does, it simply shows you the interest in a specific topic over the pre-selected period of time, and it does it in relation to when that topic reached its peak interest. So the blue line is digital transformation. The red line represents business transformation. Why did I look at comparing these two? Because I found this quite interesting. It tells me that at the beginning of the previous decade, people were actually slightly more interested in the concept of business transformation than they were in digital transformation. But you will see that around February 2014, there was something that happened where the world started becoming more interested in digital transformation than the concept of business transformation. So it tells me that transformation has always been a priority on the agenda of senior leaders, of executives. Business know that they have to continually change and transform their business in order to survive. But then something happened, is that what I believe happened is that businesses started to realize that a key part of their transformational journeys requires an understanding of technology. To have a successful transformational program, you need to incorporate technology. You need to incorporate digital capabilities somehow. So for me, yes, it might be considered a good sign that people started getting invested in the idea of digital transformation, but I do have a flag and a concern that digital started leading the way. So people started saying, okay, let's see what the technology can do and then apply our transformation to the technology. When in principle, I believe that organizations should first define what they want to do, why they exist, what their purpose is as an organization, and then look at the technology to support them achieving those strategic objectives. But if you look at this, I'm worried that the world has gotten to a point where all these amazing concepts are starting to drive business, and business is starting to customize its visions and its strategies around all these amazing concepts. Very interestingly, you will see that there's two just dates that were very interesting for me to note. There is that prior to COVID-19 and the pandemic starting, that the peak interest for the concept of digital transformation was reached in November 2019. So the scoring in terms of interest is down out of a score of 100. So at that point in November 2019, the scoring was 67. But it's very interesting. So from a perspective, just to give you some context here, is that it took about 8 years for it to get to that point of interest. And then very interestingly, what happened after that is that you'll see up to the end of last month, it's still peaking. The interest in digital transformation is still peaking around the world. What is digital transformation? How can I use it? What are good success stories about it? But it shows you definitely that it went from a point system of 67 in November 2019 to 100 points in April 2021. Within the span of 1 year, where it took 8 years to get to the November 2019 score. So very much this little meme that we've all seen and laughed about, and it's probably been overdone. Yes, actually COVID-19 has jumped and increased the impetus towards digital transformation, as can be seen in this graph. So as we proceed in terms of the discussion, let's talk about, okay, what is digital transformation? And I'm sure many of you, when you saw the topic of this discussion today, were saying, okay, he's going to give us a simplistic definition of digital transformation. What do you think digital transformation is? If you look at the internet and do research, there are so many definitions and concepts about this. And in fact, it's confusing. When you try to talk to business, your sponsors, your stakeholders, the idea is always to try simplify it. So is your digital transformation journey, some people see it as going from paper to digital. Some people see it as going from manual to automation. Some people see it as using technologies like blockchain, or using technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, chatbots. So there's all this understanding around what is digital transformation, what are those, and those are all good components of it that can help on the digital transformation. So here's my view, my very simple view on what is digital transformation. It doesn't matter. I'm sorry if I set you up for that, and I'll tell you why I believe it doesn't matter. I said before we can talk about what is digital transformation, we need to be able to answer the question, why? Why are we going on a transformational journey? Why, as executives, as leader in this digital world, why do we believe our organizations need to change and transform? Why do we need to change and transform? Because if you don't have that answer set up for yourself and you cannot definitively say why, the what doesn't matter that much. The what needs to support the why. And very much as leaders, we need to be able to navigate and start with the why. And this was alluded to in the former presentation as well. You need to articulate your vision, your journey holistically, and the technology should then support you. Because once you can answer the why, then you can know what technology should I use, which ones should I not use, what makes sense for me to do, what makes sense for me to not do and to avoid. So I'm going to ask you around the table, why do you want to change and transform? Why does your organization want to change and transform? And often there are two very simple reasons. Either an organization feels like, or a person feels like they have to, and this is sometimes a good start. So one of the reasons, and Jose alluded to this earlier, that a lot of digital transformation efforts have not been successful. That is sad. So it means that companies have invested in digital transformation, it hasn't been successful. So what it tells me is that oftentimes it's because they felt they had to. And they had to because we've heard examples. We don't want to be another Blockbuster. We don't want to be like Nokia cell phones. And the examples go on and on. We don't want to be a Kodak. So we have to transform because we don't want to become extinct. The problem with a have to mindset around transformation is that it puts you in survival mode. And once you're in survival mode, you're in fight or flight mode, it starts to limit your creativity. You see challenges. People as an organization becomes more resistant to change because they're in this mindset, we have to change, we want to survive, but it's a fight or flight mentality. And because of this, organizations are a bit slower to adopt change. And as a result, transformation efforts, the results of transformation efforts take longer to be realized and materialized. So you can either have a have to mindset on transformation, or ideally, you can have a want to mindset. And this is for me very powerful. So yes, your transformational journey might have started with a have to mindset. We have to be able to compete. We have to survive. We have to start looking at technology. And that's great. But the opportunity that we have, and I believe in terms of trying to increase the likelihood of success on our transformational journeys, is to firstly move ourselves and then our organizations to want to transform mindsets. This then puts us in a place where we are open, we see opportunities instead of challenges, we are more agile, and we're embracing change. And as a result of that, I believe then the results of the transformational effort become more quickly visible as opposed to an organization that feels that they have to. And just for yourself, taking a seat back, whatever the initiative, whatever the goal, the project is, if you put two people, two organizations, all things being equal next to each other, which of these two do you think have a better likelihood of success? So again, I'll ask you, why do you want to change? Why are you here? Is it simply because of COVID-19? And if it is, that is fine. That might have been the jumpstart, but to really succeed and try to achieve success in the future, you need to move to a want to change mindset. This picture that I'm putting in front of you is very interesting for me, and it alludes to the video that I showed at the beginning of my talk, is that if you look at this concept of being above the clouds, I think this is where we sometimes need to take a step back as leaders in our institutions to say, yes, below the surface, below the clouds, there might be storms and whirlwinds and floods. It could be chaos, but we need to come to a place where we can get clarity of mind and understand what we see on the horizon. What do we see in the future? Why, as I mentioned before, why do we want to change? We need to be able to articulate that first before we say what we will use, how we will get there. And I believe this then gives us clarity on the future. And as I said, part of the talk that I want is to talk about how to simplify the future. And I believe articulating your why puts you in a very good position to articulate what your future state will look like. And a part of this for me and part of leaders, I believe, is we need to get into a place where we start simplifying the complex. Colin Powell had this quote to say, and I agree with it a lot, is that, you know, we sometimes make simple things complicated. And I believe that some things are just genuinely complicated, but I believe that we can simplify it so that business and our stakeholders understand the complicated in a simple manner. And as Colin Powell said, is that that's one of the real signs of creativity. So let's exercise some creativity in taking these very complex concepts to make business understand them in a simple way, because what that also does, it makes people understand how it can benefit them, how the work that they aligns to this, and how they can support this initiative. And it makes buying a lot easier. I mentioned that I showed you art at the beginning of this with the video. And another artist that we should all be familiar with, Leonardo Da Vinci, also had a quote where he said, "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." So this from somebody that's considered one of the geniuses of the time. He said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So as digital leaders, yes, we need to know what blockchain can do and cloud computing, 3D printing, etc. All these concepts, we need to understand that, but we need to also be able to translate these complex concepts so that people can understand why we're doing it, how it supports our why, and that will help us to increase the buy-in that we will be able to get. So this is my attempt at simplification. And a lot of what my role has been is to simplify these things and to create a vision and alignment within the organization. Is that for me, the future in a simplified way will simply belong those that are able to take data, combine it with processes, which will result in the value that you want to create as an individual or as an organization. And that value could be increased in your stock price, it could be increased in a customer base, it could be increasing efficiencies, reducing unnecessary costs, increasing customer satisfaction. That is the value that you will derive. So let's unpack this a little bit. But before we do, in the previous discussion, Jose also asked Kevin, what is the common mistakes that people make on their transformational journey? Here, in terms of my equation to simplify the future, is two common mistakes that I believe organizations make. So organizations will either on a transformational journey heavily invest in data, because I believe that at this point in time, every organization understands how critical data is to their journey. So I'm not going to talk a lot about that, because I believe that everybody's heard a lot about it and you already are bought into it, and I'm sure you are investing it in some form or fashion. But the problem is, if you invest just in data and you're not looking at the processes to action that data, you are not going to create value. The data on its own is great and it will give you great insights, but it does not give you value unless you are able to action it. You need to make a decision. You need to execute on a process to be able to action that data to give you the results you want and create the value that you intended. On the other side of the spectrum is you can get at the situation where an organization is investing in processes. We're talking about digital process automation at this conference, and they're looking at robotics and software and solutions, but they're not looking at the data to support, are they executing on the right processes? And what this happens is, how do you know you're doing the right thing if you don't have the data to support you, to tell you what the right thing is to do, to say, this is what you should do, when you should do it, where you should do it, to which customers you should target it. That is where the data will help make sure that you are doing the right things as an organization. And if you are doing things without the data insights, you're potentially wasting resources and not doing the right things. So as digital leaders around this table, when we're looking at our transformational journey, is we need to holistically look at the end-to-end. It was also mentioned in the previous segment. We have to look at the end-to-end. We have to look at the data, start with the data, what is it saying, and being able to understand the processes that we have, the solutions, and the different various systems and methods that we have to execute on that data, and combine them together in a way that will give us exponential value. You'll notice in my formula that I had previously, I don't talk about technology, I do not talk about digital, because as I mentioned in the beginning, in that graph that I showed you, is that I believe the technology is there, it exists, but the technology needs to support the why and the what we want to do. So once we have that clarity, we then go to the technology to help us in terms of executing on that process. So very briefly, when we talk about data, in that I've only got 2 slides, I'm not going to talk a lot about it, I promised you that, is basically why we look at data. And it was said, nobody can predict the future. Jose says we can't predict the future, so we should create it. And I love that saying, Jose, by the way. But no one can predict the future, but I believe using data, you can get pretty close. So there was an article in McKinsey that I read recently, and they said that there's a company called Measurable AI. that at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, when the subscriptions or the usage of Zoom just started increasing, this algorithm was able to predict their quarterly earnings within 1% accuracy compared to industry consensus that was out by more than 10%. So again, I'm just emphasizing, we know that data is important and we must not neglect and need to continue to invest in this capability. We need to find the people that can actually help us make sense of this, the data scientists, the machine learning experts. We need to heavily focus and invest on this. We also need to know what data we need to use when. We know there's forms of descriptive data, which tells us what is happening. We have predictive data that tells us what will happen. For example, if we reduce our costs by 10%, how much will our profits increase? Then we have prescriptive data that tells us what we should do in a specific situation. And this is just some of the examples. There are many different forms, but these are different models of data that can give us insight and helps us to tell us what is the right thing to do. So we need to invest in this very, very intentionally as organizations. Last comment on data. So I would not do you a service if I didn't talk about the customer in this digital transformation journey. And one of the things data does is that it takes us from understanding very basic concepts or data points about our customers in terms of we might know gender, we might know age, where they live, you know, the type of products or services they get from us as an organization. We have basic types of information. But in terms of trying to get more information and analyze the information we have, the objective is really to say, guys, we want to move from having this basic understanding and segmentations of customers to being able to fill in the blanks, the stuff we don't know, to get the view of what an individual entity looks like, an individual person or an individual organization. So we need to move past this point where we are segmenting our customers based on genders or age or whatever demographics we use to try narrow down, and we've heard these things, to a segment of one. And that's for an individual, but the same for an organization. Instead of marketing or engaging an organization from the perspective of the industry they operate in, or their revenue or their turnover, to really understand where they are, what stage they are in their growth cycle, and how we can best partner with them, because then I believe you have the greatest potential for having customers that are loyal, customers that trust you as an organization, customers that will refer you as an organization to others. And I believe that is one of the biggest objectives. And just a comment on this, I think long are the days where you can say you are customizing your communications to customers because you've said, dear Sergio, in your emailer. That is not customization, and that is not a good use of data. I actually had an experience the other day where there's a company that I've done online purchases for various goods from them 4 times. I've purchased from them 4 times, right? And then I got this email from them. They noticed I hadn't made the transaction or made a purchase on their website for some time. So I got an email saying, dear Sergio, we noticed you haven't visited our store in a while. Please come by. We've got some great offers for you. So I got a bit excited. They didn't say what the offers were in the email, so I clicked on the link to the website. And when I got to the website, there was about 70% of the stuff I normally buy was out of stock. 70% of the stuff I buy, and they know what I buy because I bought from them. They have a database somewhere in their ecosystem that says Sergio has bought this stuff from us, and 70% of the stuff he buys, hang on guys, we don't have it in stock. Is it worth sending this email to him? Because honestly, at the end of the day, I was frustrated. They would have done better to not have sent me that email. So how hard would it have been to say, for them to have done a check with that algorithm, whatever, just say, okay guys, Sergio hasn't been with us for a while. Let's see what he normally buys. Let's make sure we have it in stock and then see if we can offer him something. And we know there's also examples of great companies around the world that have gotten it right, but I'm just giving you an example of that. So I actually had a chat with them and gave them some advice around that. But that's in terms of how to use your data to satisfy your customer, to make sure that you engage with them in a way to make them feel unique and understood, so that they know that you are adding value to their lives every time that you engage with them. I'm just checking my time to make sure I not run over. Quickly, briefly on process. is we know this. This is Digital Process Automation Conference, and we've seen this quote by Bill Gates. And why I love this quote is that it talks about, guys, before you apply automation or technology, check the process for its inefficiencies, because if you apply the technology to it, you're going to maximize the inefficiencies. And I learned very early in my digital transformation career that people were hoping that technology would solve their problems. But I realized that in many cases, it wasn't the system that was the problem, it was their process. And simply by re-engineering the processes, we were able to derive 40% of the benefits that they wanted from the system without even touching a system. And this is where I feel skills like process engineering, industrial engineering have fallen short in our digital transformation journeys. And that's why in my capacity, I started a team of process engineers that are part of the digital transformation journey to look at the processes. And the height for me of process engineering is that actually at the end of the day to remove unnecessary processes and not just to automate them. There's a quote by Peter Drucker that you'll see on your screen now says, there's nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all. And sometimes we need to take a moment and say, guys, we want to get a system, we want to automate, but do we still need to do this thing? Is there not another way that we can do it? And that's what we should do first and foremost. And very briefly, if you have your data insights, typically you can action that data by either using humans. So we maybe want to see what customers we want to reach out to with a new value proposition. We can send that list to our sales representatives and they can contact our customers to do a sell, or you can do development on your existing systems to create and develop triggers and emailers, or you can use robotics to also fill that void and actually be able to engage with the customers and action that data. Just a very important point. It's very important to choose the right process to action the data, and the data should inform that, because you also need agile processes. You know that there's data that changes on a minute by minute, second by second basis, stock market prices, exchange rates. So to be able to capitalize on the changing data, you need processes that can respond. However, you need to balance this. Gartner talks about a tequilibrium, which means that a company needs to find the correct mix of traditional versus digital capabilities that they'll need to succeed. So it's not one or the other, it's a combination of these that you as a company need to be aware of. My last slide, simply in summary, to simplify the future is that my view is the future will belong to those that can correctly take data, apply the correct process, and this will give you exponential value and make sure that you thrive in the future. And very briefly, some of you might be familiar with Simon Sinek's golden circle, which is 3 concentric circles. And at the middle of the circle is why, then comes how, and then what is the result of it. So with that, I thank you, and I hope you got something out of this presentation.
Thank you very much, Sergio. Wonderful highlights of the important aspects of culture, mindset, key principles for accelerating innovation, value creation. Very good reminders for all of us on important items. Some of the questions and comments that happened during your presentation have a little bit to do with your background and the journey that you have been undertaking in a financial institution. I mean, financial institutions, banks are difficult places to implement change. Lots of regulations, lots of mindsets. They're still kind of stuck in the past. Tell us a little bit about the journey that you have had, how long it's been, what is it started, just a little bit of color on how has it been to be a leader of transformation in the financial services space.
Thank you for the question. It's a good point. I think, coming into a new role, and I was the first in this role, it can be exciting, but it can also be daunting. So if you come into a role that somebody else already had, it's easier to say, okay, what did they do and how can I build on that or improve? But if you haven't had that, and looking at something as complex at the time as digital transformation, to make sense, what do we really need to do as a company to transform? That was my first starting point. And then to say, okay, what are the key things capabilities we need to have to help in our journey? And I think a lot of it has been sense making, has been simplifying these complex concepts that we've been throwing around and what it means and when we should use it, when we should invest. And then obviously you need to scale, because obviously at the end of the day, people want to see value. They want to see return on investment. And that's where I've learned the art of very much starting small, getting a small budget, doing a proof of concept, for example, like what I did with robotics, making sure it works and growing out. And it's become such a success story and a critical part of our organization that we're building on now at the moment. But at the same time is to continue the change journey. And Kevin also alluded to it in the former discussion, where he says it's sometimes good when his customers talk to potential new customers so they can hear as well. Same concept internally is to take the customers that have benefited from some of our innovations and actually pitch it to the rest of the executives, as opposed to just hearing from me. So I think it's a very interesting journey. I've had a lot of learnings on the way, and you're right, one of the recent changes is that as part of it, I've added the data component to my portfolio. Previously, it used to be looking at the digital transformation strategy, and specifically running robotic process automation, process engineering, as well as the innovation program within the group. So I'm also responsible for ensuring that culture of innovation, the questioning why, continuous improvement is part of that type of discussion. But yes, mindset is important. And one of the things I always wonder is whether, if you are a fintech or a startup, do you need somebody to drive digital transformation? And the answer is probably no, because your whole mindset is you're starting from scratch. And in a bigger organization, it can be a bit more challenging because you've got a lot of legacy. Yes, there's systems, but the mindset and the regulations 100%. So it's not a quick journey, but it doesn't have to be an excessively long journey. You have to have a long 5-year to 10-year view and look at how you're going to derive value as you're going on your journey. Business still needs to be able to support existing customers. They need to fix issues that are there, and you want them to transform at the same time. And that's very much where I am, to help business to transform and grow, and in whatever capacity, while they're still keeping the lifeblood of the organization going, making sure we satisfy our existing base.
That's excellent. And tell us a little bit about how do you there's a tremendous amount of disruption happening right now in financial services and all over the world. And so there is the now, and then there is the future that you have to manage a little bit of both, otherwise you're going to be in trouble. So how do you deal with the need to strengthen the core through transformations in the core, to lots of things that can be done in the core of the business to be better, but balancing that with the making sure that you're not myopic and also not overlooking some threats from new technologies like blockchains and bitcoins and all these digital technologies that are coming into the financial services sector. How do you operate on this finding the right blend and balance, if you will, of core versus future opportunities?
And it's a very interesting question, and one that is probably not straightforward. But I've also realized that as organizations, once you've set your trajectory, once you've answered your why and your purpose and what you want to do, it's difficult to sometimes stay on that, because you are being bombarded by a lot of new things, a lot of what competitors are doing, and you need to find a way from an organization to not distract. Because remember, you've got finite resources. You've got resources that you want to invest in machine learning and AI and robotic process automation, etc., etc. Then you've got these new technologies. Okay, now we need to check how we can use cloud computing. Now we need to see what we can do about blockchain. So there's a lot of this stuff coming, and yes, it is a massive challenge, but you need to investigate, understand what those things do, what they can do for you as an organization, and does it fit into your original plan? Understanding that, yes, you need to review your plan, make sure that it's fit for purpose, because things are changing. But be very careful. We know the term FOMO very well, fear of missing out. And organizations must just be careful around that, because there's a lot of shiny things out there. And I mean, Jose, you mentioned earlier, a lot of digital transformation efforts are not successful. That's a fact. And I think a lot of it is because you keep wanting to add an experiment. And I'm saying this cautiously because I believe in experimentation, by the way. But you need to find a way to do it meticulously. Look at the data. That's why my formula you said, I need to understand the data. What has this technology done? What has it actually done for an organization? And I mean, someone alluded to in former sessions that sometimes the first mover advantage is not that great. Okay, sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. but you need to, as an organization, have a conviction. This is our purpose, this is our focus, what are we going to do, does this thing fit in, and quickly decide whether it works or not. Do those proof of concepts, do those POCs, and then see if it's distracting from your why and your focus, or if it's going to add to it. And I think each organization needs just to figure out that balance.
That's a well put, and I can sense your tension, because with great leaders and organizations, the world of greatness is not this or world, it's an and world filled with complexities and forces that pull in very different directions. And it's not about sometimes choosing one versus the other. It's about finding the intelligent blending of the two. And that can be, and so I can see the measure in your words is like, you got to be careful about experimentation. But listen, experimentation is really important. I completely relate. It's not that black and white. It's about finding the right balance and blend that makes sense for your organization.
Yeah, I think, and I mean, just to add on that, I think I've also read, and I'm sure any of us that do a lot of reading, you'll see, I find it interesting now in the world that they're saying, CFOs, chief financial officers, need to think more like CIOs, and CIOs need to think more like CFOs so that they can give value. So you've got this thing where you've been pushed to have so many facets to this digital transformation journey that it can be overwhelming. And that's why, again, I really believe there's something artistic and creative in simplifying these things, understanding the complex and simplifying it, because there is these demands, and that's why it's not either or. The balance is somewhere in between.
That's right. And okay, so love talking to you, because you are a practitioner. You are implementing new ideas that create value, the essence of innovation. So we all know about, there is a hype scale that exists with respect to technologies, where certain things sound really good, but when you look at the details, this thing is not ready to be implemented at scale, right? So there are lots of small bullets that you can fire, but no major cannonballs you should rely on for those types of technologies. So as you look at the different technologies, there are a soup of letters with all the different technologies available: AI, NLP, RPA, process mining, and the list goes on and on and on. If you look from a practitioner perspective, what's creating value today in your implementation of innovation in the financial services? What are you finding most useful right now for you in terms of value creation, technologies that create value?
Yeah, so I'll take it from my personal experience. Obviously, there's always what's working now, what you believe will work in the medium term, and what you need to start investing in and experimenting with the long term. But for us, our robotics journey and our data journey has started showing great results, and in fact been showing great results. And that's why we've started putting together. Previously, data was its own, and process and robotics was separately. And I think part of the company's understood that you need to bring these things together to have a holistic view of, okay, what is it we actually want the data to do? There was a time when I saw, almost all company strategies and vision documents had something about data. It's like you couldn't have a vision document. If you wanted a reputable vision document, it needed to have something about data. But oftentimes it wasn't clear what that data was supposed to do. What do you want to use it for? That's why for me, I'm really passionate. I'm not a process engineer. My background is in information systems. That's where I got my qualification. But I'm very passionate about processes. Many of you would have heard about Brett King. He wrote Bank 4.0. He talks about going back to first principles. So even though I work in an organization that's been around for more than 100 years, is to look at, okay, yes, we have this legacy, but if we have to start from first principles, how should we ideally do that? So yeah, I think it's for me, we've seen value in terms of robotics. We started with, I was the only one in the team. We're now a team of 19 of doing all this stuff. And it's because we've managed to show success. It's also because, and technology in itself won't give you the results. You need to have a proper process. And one thing that I feel is often neglected is change management. And we often think project management and change management are the same, and we neglect the change management because we're doing good project management. But so much engagement is required to understand requirements, make business understand, and then to say, okay, if I give you this bit of data, how will you utilize it? If I automate this process for you, how will it derive value to your customers, to you as a business, to your profits? So a lot of that has to create that thinking out of the technology that we've been introducing. And sometimes we've had to say no to technology that in our organization just didn't make sense, or the time was not right. And that's also a very important lesson we've had to learn. So we're growing capabilities that are working, but we're also very actively seeing the horizon, as you mentioned, seeing what's out there, finding ways to quickly do investigations and studies and make a call, no, yes, or maybe in 6 months' time. And I think that's where you derive value. And I mean, things that I'm very passionate about is artificial intelligence, data. I mean, it's hard to, in this day and age, you've got to be a generalist and a specialist, and you mentioned the tension. Yeah, but it's an interesting world. And again, you have to start with wanting to change. I've also been in that place where I've had to change, and I've realized there's just so much opportunity if you want to change and learn. And it's not about working harder. You know the concept of work smarter, but it involves you actually taking your eyes above the clouds and figuring out what is going to make the best impact for you and your organization in the next 1 year, in the next 3 years, and in the next 5 years. So I hope I answered your question a little bit at least.
Very much so, very much so. So one final quick question here is related to, you're in Namibia. Are there specific challenges or opportunities when it comes to the country or maybe even the continent that are unique, or you're dealing pretty much with the same issues that everybody's dealing everywhere else in the world?
So yeah, I think in Africa and Namibia, I've heard a lot of people say that we're in this place where we have the opportunity to leapfrog and obviously skip a lot of stages that other countries and more developed countries have gone through, and actually start and set the pace for certain technologies. And we've seen examples around that. Disruption in the financial services has been very significant in Africa, and we know many of those examples in PSA, etc. But there's also, you're right, there's a lot of mindset, and we also have. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have, which I think the whole world has, is this friction between innovation and regulation. So again, it's a journey of taking our regulators on board with us as we go along, because at the end of the day, they're there to protect the financial system in my world. That's my regulators protect the financial system. So it's understanding the intent that they're trying to achieve with regulation and having discussions to say, okay, but are there other ways that we can mitigate or achieve your objectives without having the stringent regulation, which could, in some instances, inhibit innovation? So yes, there's pros and cons, and there's areas where we share very similar challenges to around the world, but we also in a place where we are trying to leapfrog as much of the technologies that has been there. I mean, between South Africa and Namibia, we've got very advanced banking channels with banking apps and online banking apps. We've received awards for it. So that's one example where we've actually managed to do really well in terms of leapfrogging in that space. But yes, we are aware of other challenges that are out there. So challenges and opportunities.
Sergio, what a pleasure to have you with us directly from Namibia to our global audience today, sharing your expertise, sharing your journey of culture, business, and also, digital transformation. So thank you so much for the insights. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Sergio De Souza directly from Namibia to our global audience today, sharing his expertise, sharing his insights on culture, business, and digital transformation. We are going to change hats, and at the top of the hour, we're going to be welcoming the Director of Global Digital Industrial Operations for Electrolux. Hao Din is going to be here with us. Very excited about hearing Hao's perspective on the human side of digital process automation. He's going to talk about the journey of digital process automation at the organization and the lessons learned on the human side of that change. So we're going to be closing the session right now. Again, if you want to continue to participate in our exchanges throughout the day today, check out the LinkedIn posting on the conference. It's under my name, José Pires. You can look that up on LinkedIn. You'll see a posting there. Ask questions, interact, thank our sponsors, thank our speakers for being part of our journey of digital process automation here this week. So I will see you back at the top of the hour with Hao Din.